everybody, Liz here. Today I'm going to show you a little bit on how to do some mold making. Mold making is a very valuable skill to have in cake decorating if you want to make a mold of a particular sculpture that you like, a little toy, pretty much anything within reason that you can imagine you can mold and then cast it in sugar or chocolate to put onto your cakes. So I'm going to show you a few tricks that I do to make my molds. And there are many other ways to make these types of molds, and I don't think that my way is the best way, but it is the least expensive and the easiest way for me who doesn't know a lot about mold making. So let's go ahead and get started with our first mold. Okay, so to make our wine bottle, the first thing we need to do is make a couple of molds. So I have this plastic bottle that is actually from this guy right here. And these are like mini wine bottles that you can buy at the grocery store, the liquor store, and they're usually plastic, so they're easy to handle for this sort of thing. And this is a little mini glass that I got actually at Goodwill. So I just went to like a little secondhand store and looked for, you know, they always have tons and tons of glasses, and I got this for 10 cents, so pretty good deal. You could probably buy these online. I'm not exactly sure what this is, if this is just a mini wine glass or if it's like a alcohol, maybe it's a brandy glass, I don't know. But it looks like a tiny little wine glass. And this is actually glass, so that's nice. And it looks proportionate to this, you know, bottle here. And I mean, you could do like a full-size wine glass and you could do a full-size bottle, but that's like a lot of mold material and a lot of resources. So I'm trying to get the idea across of a cool wine cake without having to make a gigantic mold. So let's do the bottle first. And all I did was unscrewed the cap and I dumped out the wine, and then there's like a little extra piece that is left over from the lid, and I just used a pair of wire cutters to clip that off. I peeled off the label and dried everything up, and what I have left is this bottle. So to make our mold, I'm actually going to use Legos, and this is like an easy way for me to make kind of a custom container. Sometimes I use bigger boards, but so these are called green base plates, and they are made in a variety of sizes. So I have small ones and large ones that I only use for mold making. So you don't want to like be using your kids' toys or something like that, because this is going to be coming in contact with food and things like that. So you want to have a set of Legos that's specifically used for your cake decorating purposes. And I have various blocks and things that are going to be used to be making the wall. So first thing I'm going to do is prep my bottle. You're going to need a funnel and some white sugar. Okay, so I'm going to fill this guy up, fill this bottle up all the way to the top with white sugar. And this is a technique that I learned from watching Dominic Palazzo from Marvelous Molds. He has some really great free tutorials on marvelousmolds.com on how to make really great molds using their mold material. So we got all the way to the top, and then you could use Marvelous Molds safety clay, but this is what I have and this is what I've been using, and this is just Sculpey. This is just like kind of clay that you can get at the craft store, and I buy it in big boxes and I use it for all my stuff, so that's what I'm going to be using. And basically what I'm trying to do is seal off the top of this guy right here. So just tamp that down. And you could just leave the lid on, but the silicone could potentially go into the cracks of the lid, which is not what we want. Okay, so just going to take a piece of clay. I'm just going to push that down into the top. Really push it and just make the top of this flush. Got that? Now we want to kind of map out about how big our mold is going to be, and the opening to this bottle is going to be on the bottom. So we want to make sure that the bottom is sealed off from the silicone, so no silicone seeps underneath the bottle, so that when we pour the Isomalt into the mold and then pour it out, we can kind of hide and fix up the bottom, but we want the top to look nice and clean. We want our mold to be thick. We don't want it to be overly thick because we have to cut through this. Just kind of creating a general sort of shape around everything. Looks like we have pretty even shape. Cutting in on the corners just a little bit so that I'm not wasting like a ton of mold material. There we go, that looks pretty good. So now that I've kind of got my shape generalized, I'm going to take some more of my clay and I'm going to make a layer right around the bottom, all the way into the corners. Doesn't have to be super thick. And this is going to seal the bottom of our bottle so that it's nice and level, and it's going to keep our silicone rubber from leaking out the bottom. Not that it really should. These Legos do a good job of kind of sealing everything in, and then they're easy to take apart, so that's good. To all of those little corners. Smooth out the area where the bottle is going to be. Okay. I'm going to take this guy, center him in the middle, press down firm. You know, you don't want like a go super thick over the bottom of the bottle, just enough that it's just sealed on there all the way around. You don't see any gaps. Okay, and don't move it, just leave it like that. So now we need to build these walls all the way up so that we have a good 1/2 inch on top. Make sure the layer of bricks around your clay is at least 2 layers of brick thick so that you don't get any leaks. It can be more if you want. Thicker is always better. Better safe than sorry. Okay, our colorful mold is complete. Now we need to mix up our mold material and pour it into the mold and let it set overnight. So for this mold, I am using the Smooth On liquid rubber. It's a 2-part containers that you mix together equally and then you pour in, and it makes a mold of whatever you're trying to make a mold of. And you could, of course, again, use the Marvelous mold material. This is just what I have available nearby me. It's about $25 for this whole container, and I'll be able to make both my molds with this one kit. And I get it from Dick Blick, but you could probably get it on Amazon or other craft stores, maybe even Hobby Lobby. I'm not for sure. And other liquid rubber silicone stuff that might work for you, but I'm just saying that there are multiple options. But this is what I use. So I like to use multiple containers and mix up small batches to continue filling up what I need rather than one large batch, because I don't like to have any leftovers. This stuff is also really sticky and gooey, so try not to get it on anything because it's really hard to get off. First, give your individual containers a stir. There's like this little pool of grease on the top, so you want to mix it until it's all combined. Okay. And then we're going to go 1/2 and 1/2. That's about halfway up. And then you add the pink. Then mix together until there's no streaks or anything. You want to make sure there's no swirls. After we have our batch mixed, we're going to hold the cup, a few inches above and pour in a very, very thin stream in the corner of the mold and let it build up from the bottom up. So don't pour onto the glass, or to the bottle, I should say. Pour next to the bottle and to the base, and then let it build up over the bottle, and that will minimize any bubbles and any spots that might be problematic. Make our mold really nice looking. And pouring from a tall stream like this helps the bubbles to pop as they pour. Okay, we're about halfway there. I'm gonna mix up another batch. Okay, when we're streak free, go ahead and pour in the second batch. little bit more. I'm just pressing my skewer down around the edges of the bottle to sort of agitate all the different layers of mold together. You don't want to get any bubbles in there, so just do it gently. This is just to make sure that all of our different layers that we created of mold material bind together. And then we're going to let this set overnight just to make sure that it's perfectly set. Okay, so our mold has been sitting overnight and it is all set up. And now I'm going to take off all of the Legos, and you can see that in a couple of places it's leaked out just a little bit, and that's fine. Like, it's not going to harm the mold at all. All right, so after our bottle is free from its Lego prison, we want to make some cuts with an X-Acto knife. We want to make sure that it's pretty much down the center. So this is about 3 inches. So I'm going to go about 1.5. I want to make a line all the way down on both sides. Line it up on the bottom. And then what we're going to do is carefully, with an X-Acto blade, we're going to make a cut, and we're going to make several small cuts continuously. And we're going to take our time so that we make a nice clean mold. So first I'm just going to start here and trying to keep my blade as straight as possible. Just going to make a nice long slice all the way through the rubber, all the way across. Make sure you don't have your thumb in the way. Okay, and you should be able to see where your previous cut was and just kind of continuously cut. Okay, just got to work on the neck area. There we go. Almost through. There we go. So now we have a really cool bottle mold. Just like that. Looks really great. Turned out really great. So now when we want to make our glass mold, we'll have a perfectly beautiful, inexpensive mold to make. So that's how we did the bottle. And set that aside. So for our wine glass mold, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And you could do this exact same way that we made our wine bottle mold, you know, where you do the tall sort of mold like this and then you cut it. But because there is this really super thin stem, I'm actually going to use a little bit of a different technique. And what this is actually a candle holder that I found in Goodwill. And sometimes you can find like small little brandy snifters or little tiny glasses that look like wine glasses, but basically you just want something that looks proportionate next to your little mini wine bottle. So look around at Goodwill, antique stores, places like that to find something small that you can use for your wine glass. Again, I'm going to be using the liquid rubber molding material. We're going to be using our Legos, and for this you're going to need some mold release, and you can get this at craft supply store or you can get it on Amazon. That's probably a better place to find something like this. And this is just going to make sure that our 2 pieces of rubber do not stick to each other. Okay, so we're going to prepare the top of this glass the same way that we did our bottle. I'm actually just going to take the same sugar, take our Sculpey clay, just put that on the top, nice and flush with everything. Okay, so we're going to start building our box for our wine glass here. You want to make sure that there's good 1/2 inch on each side, around the sides and the bottom. And remember to randomize your blocks so to minimize any leaking and stuff. Clean the stuff from the last mold. So once we have our box built, I'm going to take a little piece of clay, smush it into the tall side. This box only needs to be half as tall as the glass, you know, like it doesn't have to cover the whole thing right now. So we're only going to be pouring half a mold right this second. This is the only side that needs to be tall. It's this side right here. Just going to smooth that all into the little corners. And then we're going to center this onto the tall side so that it has space on every side. And I'm going to press it down, hopefully centered. Should be some space on the end of the foot area too. Need some space, you know, up top. Could always use a bigger one of these baseboards if you don't have enough space. That should be okay for me. Okay, and then we're just gonna put a little wedge of clay right here, just to keep this part of the cup from falling. So just leave that there. And then we need to bring these walls up so that they meet the center point here. It's just another like layer or so, another layer of bricks. So basically we want space all underneath this glass, if that makes sense. Because this is so small, we can do it this way. Still okay there? This is what we've got going on in here. So now, get all my bricks out of the way. Spray a little bit of my mold release into the mold. Just kind of get it all over everything. Don't need like a ton. Make sure you mix your jars of mold material thoroughly so that they are not separated. Otherwise your mold may not cure correctly. So I'm going to use this little container as my measuring cup so I can make sure that I get equal amounts. That much of the pink. I'll put those both into the same container. Mix until there's no swirls. Okay, so then after we have our mixture all made, we're going to pour this into the bottom of our container from a few inches up in a slow, steady stream, because the thin stream helps the bubbles dissipate. So you don't want to just dump it all in there. Just need like a teeny bit more. Basically, we want this to just go halfway up the stem. Take another piece of clay and just kind of roll it into a little tube and just slip that down, not too far, just into one of the edges, just on each side. And this is going to be basically a lock so that when we put in our top piece, it has something to lock into. Not too far, just barely in there. Make sure it's just kind of pressed up against the wall. But 3 should be enough. So now we're just gonna let this dry for 6 hours until it's set, and then we'll pour the second half. Okay, so our first part of our wine mold that we've molded is complete. So I'm going to remove the clay, and if there's some areas where it hasn't completely come out, and make sure you remove this back part. Might have to remove a couple of layers of Lego to get to it. That's okay. Just want to make sure that all the clay is out. Okay, once we have the clay all cleaned out, we need to build up our wall. All right, now that we've got this wall built up, time to mix some more of our mold material. Make sure there's nothing stuck to your glass. I'm gonna spray this again with a few coats of our mold release, and that's going to, don't forget this part, because this is what keeps the molds from sticking together. We're gonna let this sit for 5 minutes, and then we're gonna apply another coat. Okay, so our mold release is dry, and I've got my 2 cups of my mold material ready to go. Just gonna pour that out and mix it together. Messy, it's very messy business. And we're just gonna agitate this like we did before until all of the swirls are out. Okay, then we're gonna go right into the side of the glass, a nice thin stream, slowly pour in. Just let the mold material slowly flow over everything, and that will reduce the bubbles. There we go. Okay, so now our top part of our mold is complete. We're gonna let that set for another 6 hours, and then we'll make sure that everything has worked out. Hopefully it has, if we've done all of the steps correctly. So our second half of our mold is complete. So now we're going to start the process of taking off our Legos. We're gonna dump out the sugar since the end popped off. Okay, so we have our mold demolded, and if we did our job right, then the top and bottom should separate pretty easily. See? Just like that. Looks pretty dang cool, huh? So there we have it. We have our two-sided mold. Just gonna take this side off. That we can use over and over so we can make some really cool wine-themed cakes, and it locks together perfectly so that it'll be easy to fill up with the sugar, and all we have to do is just kind of trim some of these little pieces off and it'll be good to go. Before we tape this up and put our isomalt into it, we just need to do a couple other small things. I'm just right down here at the base, we want to put a cut straight down into there, and this just helps release the base when it's time to take the isomalt out. Put one here, one here. So it doesn't have to be too deep, but it just helps release things so that we can flex this away from the stem a little bit safer. So once you've made your cut this way, and take your knife and make an additional little cut to make a hole at the very bottom. And this basically allows the air to escape out the bottom of this thin area when we pour the isomalt in, so that it'll pour into the foot. Otherwise it won't go down in there. Trust me, I tried. Okay, I'm gonna put down a silicone mat to kind of work on, because if I have any spills or anything, it's really easy to get cooled isomalt off of a silicone mat, but it's not so easy to get off of a table. Just don't ask me how I know that. So, and then depending on how uneven your mold is, you might want to trim it a little bit with a knife just so that it's fairly even, because you know, it's got to sit upside down to drain. This is pretty good. I have here some pre-melted isomalt. This is the Semi-Cakes clear isomalt, and I like it because you don't have to cook it to any particular temperature. You can just put it into one of these little silicone cupcake liners and melt it, and it's good to go. Let's put our mold together, and then I'm just going to tape the top and the bottom. Some tape to keep everything nice and secure. So once that's taped, I'm going to carefully make sure there's no sugar granules left over on your mold. And this is just going to serve as something for the molds to sit on top of as they drain. So when you melt your isomalt down, this is the Semi-Cakes clear pre-made isomalt, so you just have to pop it in the microwave for 15-second increments until it's liquidy. So you don't have to boil it or bring it to any particular temperature. But you do want it to be very liquidy because it has to go down into like a very, very small cavity. So you want to make sure it's nice and hot, and then pour just a really thin stream and let it drip down into that cavity. Kind of let it do its thing before we start filling it up more. Okay. Now we can go ahead and fill it all the way up. We're going to save this leftover to make our green isomalt, or you could use pre-made green from Semi-Cakes, but I'm going to let this sit for 5 minutes before I dump it out. I'm just kind of agitating it just in case there's any bubbles stuck in there. Okay, so I'm trying to guesstimate about how much isomalt I need for my bottle. I've got about 4 of these leftover clears that have cooled, and then I've put them into the little cupcake rounds, so they make these little discs. So I'm going to try and melt 4 plus a little bit, and I'm just going to put that over medium heat and kind of swirl it around every now and then until it's melted. But I don't want to bring this to a boil because we're not trying to heat this to a certain temperature, we're just trying to remelt it. So let's put that on top of the stove top, and then once it's melted, we're going to add our color. Okay, so it's been 5 minutes, so I'm going to start dumping this out and carefully place each edge of this mold so that it holds it, but it doesn't block any of the flow. So you can see that it's starting to drain out. So we're gonna let that drain and do its thing for a little bit. So this has been draining for about 2 minutes. The stream is still soft. And I'm going to use a pastry torch for making creme brulee, and I'm going to use this to heat up my knife to kind of trim off the top edge, but you could also just place this on top of like your stove element until it got hot to do this. Just going to get this nice and toasty. We don't want this to be red hot. We want it to be just hot enough that it will cut through the sugar. Basically, I want to just go in and just slice off that top edge. It should cut off pretty easily because the knife is hot. So we have a nice little edge. And don't worry about if the edge is rough because we're going to be further making it look pretty. We just want to get that little lip off first. Just set that there. And we want this to completely cool before we do anything. Don't put it in the fridge. Don't do anything with it. Just let it do its thing. Probably 30 minutes, I would say. Our Isomalt on the stovetop is melting nicely. You can see it's not boiling. It's just medium low. I'm just letting that gradually melt down. Okay, so we have our Isomalt that's all melted, and we are going to add in some green. I've got some forest green by Color & Rich and Roxy. You can use any kind of forest green though that you like. Ouch, oh, that spoon is really hot. The reason that we're using powder is so that we don't add any liquid to the Isomalt, because liquid makes Isomalt sticky. So powder colors the Isomalt without making it sticky. Just gonna mix, mix, mix. Add in some more. I'm just gonna gently stir until the powder is all mixed in. We don't want to be getting any bubbles in there though. So looks pretty good. Kind of test the clarity about how see-through it is. Just want to make sure it's not lumpy. Back and forth, back and forth. Then when you can put it on the spoon and when you pour it down and you don't see any little lumps of powder, that's when it is ready to go. I feel like this is a little bit too bright, so I'm just going to add in a little bit of black to kind of tone it down and turn it into like that dark green that you see for wine bottles. If you ever have a color that's too bright, like too saturated, and you want it to be a little bit more earthy, a little bit more toned down, you just add some black. And the reason I did this in a pot is so that I could color a large amount at once, whereas if I did it in multiple batches of a silicone container, there's a potential that all of the color wouldn't be consistent, which I want to make sure it is. So this is starting to get pretty thick, so I'm just going to pop it onto the stovetop again, just till it gets really to that thin stage, and then I'm going to let it set until all of the bubbles dissipate out of it, because we don't want any bubbles in our glass. Okay, so I brought this just till it started bubbling on the stove, and I removed it from the heat, and now I'm just gonna let it sit here until all of the bubbles have dissipated, and then we're gonna pour it into our mold. Okay, time to pour our Isomalt. Got my mold all prepped, wrapped 3 times so that none of the Isomalt's going to come out between the cracks or anything like that, because this doesn't have any locks like our little glass does, so it's a little bit different style. Just gotta be real careful when you're lining up all the edges. So again, we're just gonna pour up top, nice thin stream to reduce bubbles. We're just basically dripping it down the side of the mold. And because this is a bigger mold, it's going to stay warmer for longer. And I want the walls of my bottle to be pretty thick. We're gonna drain this just like we did the other one. Line this up. Careful, this is super hot still. My leftover green, save it for later. Okay, this is stopped draining and the little stream is set but still soft. And we're going to heat up our knife just like we did with the glass. And then just carefully trim that guy off. Again, don't worry about it, you know, being perfect around the bottom because we're going to do something about that. Just want to, again, let that cool. Just let it sit and do its thing. Okay, so let's do our wine bottle mold first. This is totally cooled down, and you should be able to just carefully start loosening the edges all the way around, and you'll kind of hear it detach. We should have a nice wine bottle. Looks pretty good. There's just a couple little small areas where it leaked in the crevices, and that's totally fine. There we are. That looks very nice. Set that aside. Then we have our wine glass. Just want to be careful. And both of these things are going to have bubbles on the outside of the glass. That just happens when you pour Isomalt into silicone, unless you're using like a super duper high quality silicone. You know, this is just going to happen naturally. Now, when I poured this base, I tried a couple times to get all of the Isomalt to pour into the base of the glass, and it just didn't want to. It just kept on, you know, having one little spot where it didn't quite make it all the way down. So you could just hide this, you know, by having it face the back. But I'm going to show you another way to kind of fix that situation. So I'm going to melt a little bit of clear Isomalt. Okay, so we have our melted Isomalt. Just going to set that aside for 1 second. And we're going to take our knife and our blowtorch, and I'm going to heat up the end of it. And then I'm going to slowly cut through the base there. That should happen pretty easy. Okay, so I have my melted Isomalt here. I have my little stem, and what I'm going to do is just pour a base that is proportionate to the one that I had before. Try and keep it as round as possible. Looks pretty good. I'm just going to let that chill for a second and melt a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to take, see how this is sitting up. Okay, just want to wait for that to just set up just a little bit more. I want it to be soft but not super soft. Okay, this is good. It's firm but just a tiny bit soft right in the center. I'm just going to, oh, this is cooled down again. Need to heat that up. Okay, so this is liquidy. I'm just going to dip the stem of our glass just in there. Don't have to be a lot. Just go right in the center. Now, the annoying part is we have to sit here and hold this until it is cool. So maybe have Facebook candy. Okay, so I got really impatient because it's really warm in my room, so it's taking a while for this to set up. So I just used some of my silicone cupcake holders to kind of prop up everything to make sure that it doesn't fall over. And that works out pretty good. Okay, so let's let that thing chill for a minute. And in the meantime, and we also have these bubbles on the surface that we want to kind of get rid of. We're going to use our blowtorch to do that, but I got to warn you, you have the potential of melting this bottle if you spend too much time in any one place. So you got to do this in kind of steps, and I'll show you. So we turn on our blowtorch, and we get our flame going, and we're just going to put some light action over the front here and then stop. And you have to let that cool before you do any more, otherwise you could potentially start melting the surface of your bottle and it'll start sinking in. So we're just trying to melt the surface, you know, hold the flame on there for any period of time because we don't want it to get melty. And this is why we let it sit in the mold for 10 minutes, because we want to make sure that the candy is thick enough that it doesn't melt when we do this part. This is very warm, I can feel it. Just gonna let that cool for a second before I continue on. And then to make our lip nice and clean after your stem is cooled, and I'm just going to place that right there on the pan to just melt the top just enough that we get a nice clean lip. This pan is heated up to like medium low, so it's not a lot of heat. You don't want to melt it down too much. That's it. Okay, let's finish up our bottle. After you have torched it to your liking, and hopefully have not melted it too badly, we're just gonna give it a couple little sprays of vegetable oil, and this will keep it from getting any moisture on it and crystallizing. Because even though it's isomalt and it is prone, it is not as prone to crystallization as sugar is, we still want to keep it shiny and make sure that we don't get any of our hard work ruined. I'm going to take some of our leftover fondant that we did for the grapes. Just going to roll that out. And we're going to make basically like a top cover for the top of the bottle. So after you get it rolled out thin, just going to cut that there. Going to place it about halfway down the neck. Going to pinch it in the back. Basically just kind of pinch off the excess. Just buff out any sort of rough edges, because this is supposed to kind of look like that foil wrap that they put on top. So that looks pretty good. And I didn't put any water or anything on here because, again, Isomalt does not like moisture. So you don't want to be putting any water or any sort of liquids on top of this bottle to keep it looking nice. I have here a label, and this is part of the tutorial. When you purchase it, you'll have a blank label that is part of the PDF download. And what you can do is upload this into Picasa or PicMonkey or some sort of program on your computer that allows you to open up a JPEG, and then you can put your own type over the top of it. So it could say congratulations or whatever. But the background is there, so you can just put in your own text and then print this out onto like an edible image paper. I am using Lux brand of edible images. It's kind of dry, so it's kind of chipping a little bit. You could also put this onto wafer paper. This just came off the backing very easy because it's kind of dried out. But if yours was having problems coming off the backing, just pop it into the freezer for 5 or 10 minutes and then it should peel away just fine. I am using piping gel to get my labels sticky. And it should be perfectly sized so that it just wraps around the bottle just like that without too much effort. Okay, so to make our wine in our wine glass, we want to use something that's not going to cause the isomalt to crystallize. So I've just got like a little bit of vegetable oil in a cup here, and I'm going to add some red plum dust. Start out with a little bit, and I'm going to add a little bit of amethyst, which is like a purple. And I'm basically trying to get a red wine look. It's a little purple, need a little bit more red. Adding in a little bit of red. More. So you want kind of like a deep pinky purple color. I think that looks pretty good. So just mix it around until you don't have any lumps or bumps in it. And then we can carefully pour this into our glass. There you go. You don't want to fill it too high because we don't want it to spill over or anything, but that basically looks like a little tiny glass of wine, which is cool. All right, and that is how you make a 3D mold, and hopefully you guys have found this tutorial interesting and helpful. As always, I'm available for questions if something's not quite clear or you have questions about the products that I'm using. That should be listed below the video in the description. And yeah, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.